before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show.
Hi, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and my special guest today is Todd Royal, author and consultant in the realm of geopolitics. Todd, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, and I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Well, me too. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's great talking with you. I have your book, which is titled Clean Energy Exploitations, Helping Citizens Understand the Environmental and Humanity Abuses That Support Clean Energy. Great book that you co-authored with Ronald Stein, and really excited to have this conversation today. Before we get started, though, just introduce yourself to our readers, talk about your business and what you're currently involved in.
Currently, I've been on a long-term 3-year project. I'm on 2.5 years of it with a firm called E4 Carolinas. We're an energy advocacy firm out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been working on a 3-year grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration on advanced nuclear technology, Generation 4 reactors, advanced water reactors, the micro reactors, and we have been doing a global value chain analytical framework study, economic impact study led by Dr. Joy Von Nessen of University of South Carolina. We've done a stakeholder survey, and our findings, we're going to start delivering our deliverables to the Department of Commerce very soon. It's coming to an end, and the findings have been really exciting. We've looked at over 1,400 different companies in the U.S. and globally. We've also researched using an expanded SWOT analysis of over 300 different projects.
Wow, this is so important. I don't talk enough about nuclear actually on this podcast because it's not my background. But really, if we're ever going to get to net zero, don't we have to really think about having a pretty big expansion in nuclear power generation?
We do, and I'll give you an example. Recently, I traveled to India. I went to a conference the first part of October, and got to meet with a number of leading Indian energy officials. And to give an example, they really want to do desalination, which is the process of taking seawater or impure water and making it drinkable, potable. They are looking to build upwards of 400 small modular reactors by 2040 to 2050. Because what they see is if they're ever going to lower their dependence on coal for electricity or expand their industry, they're looking that nuclear is going to be the way to go. So yes, if you ever want to decarbonize, any thoughts of net zero, the only way to do it that's technologically viable, and we do know how to do it, and we know how to build them, is nuclear power. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right, and it's something I know you address to some extent in your book. The reality is just that renewables, and of course unfortunately the current global initiative at this energy transition is focused almost entirely on wind and solar, and they're just not really capable of filling that need, are they? Displacing coal and natural gas and power generation.
They're not, and I think we've seen it even recently. The brand new International Energy Outlook just came out from the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration, where they said we see that it's going to expand upwards of 16 to 20%, if not more, fossil fuel usage through 2050. We know that India and China's national plans for electricity is coal. We also even know that the International Energy Agency has said fossil fuel use is going to expand. So if you really want to say, I want to clean up the air, I want to clean up the water, And I do want to have economic vitality, which really is going to mean jobs and economic growth. The way to do that is nuclear power. Natural gas is wonderful. It lowers emissions. It's an incredible job creator. But if you're saying that I want to have zero carbon power and electricity, the only way to do that at scale is going to be nuclear power. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Another aspect of your book, which I just think is really compelling, is you guys talk a lot about the human rights abuses that we're tolerating in the Western world to facilitate this transition. Talk about some of that, the things you guys see in that regard.
David, I've written 3 books. The first 2 books were really, they weren't that hard to write. They were long. This book was the hardest thing I've ever written. It was very emotional. I get emotional talking about it. I did not realize not just the human right abuses, but atrocities.
Yeah.
You truly do have slave labor in China making solar panels. Cobalt, which is one of the most important rare earth metals and minerals, along with copper and graphite and lithium, which we hear of. Cobalt is done mainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is anything but democratic. That if you look at the cover of our book, it's literally children and their parents at the tip of an AK-47 mining cobalt. What we talked about in this book, I coined the term blood minerals after the movie, the wonderful movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Blood Diamonds. These are blood minerals. And then you look at, from a geopolitical standpoint, which is also human rights, China is now the #1 processor and miner of rare earth metals and minerals, about 28 to 31, however you want to classify it, in the world. They use slave labor. They do all this mining with the dirtiest form of coal. They are destroying their own environment, everyone around them. So when we did the book, I mean, David, it brought up some things where there would be days that I would write it and I would honestly be sick to my stomach. I just go, I want to go hug my children right now. I want to be so thankful that I live in this country right now, because it is disgustingly gross what it takes to do lithium and cobalt and the rest of these rare earth metals and minerals.
Yeah.
We definitely got into that in the book.
Yeah, I just, how do we explain, what do you attribute it to that we are willing, it's not just the United States, it's the whole developed world, in the West mainly, that we are willing to look the other way as these things are happening, because for really the simple fact that it supports political goals, right? How do we, I mean, is it just out of sight, out of mind kind of phenomenon that motivates that?
It is. And I love my co-author, Ron Stein. He calls it leaking. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to, he's based in California. We don't mine for any more or drill for oil, but we're going to export in everything from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. Hey, we don't want to look at those little black children dying over there, but we'll say we're for BLM. It's really the grossest form of racism. And what I attribute it to, like deep down, this ideological fervor. It's a church. You've taken on a religious aspect as people did during the Crusades, or we see with Hamas right now. These people have taken on a Hamas-like fervor. The world would be better if I slaughtered Jews. The world would be better if I drive an electric vehicle and a wind turbine and a solar panel. And anything you say to me is not going to penetrate my ideology. Now, that's the negative. On the positive, I think the best way you counter that is one conversation at a time, one podcast at a time like this. And there are other people who do absolutely fantastic work on this. I know you've had the ubiquitous Green Chicken Doomberg on your podcast. Does great work on this. Michael Schellenberger's done great work.
Yes.
Lomberg, and there's a host of others. And so I hope to be able to contribute one voice to this, but also to say that these folks are taking on an Hamas-like ideological fervor. And unfortunately, pardon me for being political, they typically vote for the Democratic Party. And when you look at polling, in particular, Pew has done fantastic work on this.
Yeah.
The people who actually want nuclear power, that actually would clean up the air that these environmental organizations want, they It's nuclear power, taking it back to nuclear. Why not do hybrids? The head of Toyota has said, the former CEO and now chair, these electric vehicles don't work. The Texas Policy Foundation says you're looking at upwards of over $17 a gallon when you factor in everything.
Yeah.
We know that if you break a solar panel, it's an arsenic cocktail of things that you would have to call the EPA to help you clean them up. And then where you and I are here in Texas, drive about 3 or 4 hours away, that there are wind turbine blades just being dumped. They
Graveyards, yeah.
Graveyards, yeah, thank you, graveyards. So I think the way you change this is one conversation at a time, and you're just really honest and open with folks and going, here's what you're doing. And so if you want to move away from oil, okay, then we're going to need to use nuclear power. But if you keep doing wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, we're looking at slave labor, and we're looking at people whose skin is darker than ours are being enslaved the way sexual slavery takes over countries and regions in the world currently.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, well, what should I be doing different, right, in terms of communicating on this? And I tell them the same thing you just said. You just have to do it one conversation at a time, one podcast at a time, like we're doing, because really 98% of the media is kind of arrayed on the other side. Isn't it really kind of the most massive propaganda campaign we've ever seen in the human race? I can't think of anything really comparable to what we've seen in terms of propaganda on climate change.
I would say the last time we saw a level of propaganda this large would have been the Soviet Union during the Cold War, National Socialism, which was Nazism during World War II, starting in the 30s or late 20s. And then obviously the racic, militaristic adventurism that took place with Imperial Japan and the way they slaughtered the Chinese and the South Koreans. They wanted to create their greater economic sphere of prosperity. We haven't seen it. That's why I say these are ideological. This is communism. Communism, if you read the Communist Manifesto, read Marx, Hegel, the rest of them, it's within the human heart that, hey, if I kill people, if I make sure the proletariat, if I do all these things which make zero sense, then my gosh, the world's going to be this utopia and it's going to be perfect. And climate change, along with turbines and solar panels and EVs, have taken on the same thing. What I advocate for, David, is saying bring them to market without subsidies. Because what the market will do is David Blackmon's going to go, I'm going to go invest my $100 million. And I'm going to make the best darn EV, and it's going to have a range of 800 miles, and I've solved the problem. Or I'm going to make a solar panel that works more than 25% of the time. Same thing with a wind turbine. As opposed to this massive infusion of cash that's false money, it's deficit spending. And I think what you do is just one conversation at a time, because we are looking at an ideology, not unlike what we're looking at right now with college students at our elite universities saying, kill the Jews. That's an ideology. That is a dark-hearted ideology, just like the Malthusians of climate change, whether it's the Michael Manns of the world, the Al Gores of the world, all the environmental movements, Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, Earth Justice, and on and on and on, the Rockefeller Foundation. At your core, you think there shouldn't be enough people. There's too many people in the world, you should die. Well, that's an ideology. And that ideology, it's either going to be done one conversation at a time like this, or unfortunately, you will have a war, which we see is rapidly brewing in the Middle East. So I'm going to prefer the old Churchill thing. What was it? Jaw, talk versus war. So I'm going to prefer to choose right now, as I still can with you. Let's talk, jaw, and you just keep writing those fantastic articles that you've written in Forbes and all over around the world and educate people. That's the best thing we can do before we go to war.
Yeah. Speaking of that, you're a geopolitical analyst. I talk about what you see, the threat to energy security that war represents if it should begin to escalate.
Well, what we're really seeing is a 4-quadrant right now of where you have the Chinese backing the Russians with energy projects. Then you see the Russians backing the Iranians with drone projects that have now attacked U.S. forces, and then the Iranians with their proxies. So at any moment, the Iranians could unleash Hamas, Hezbollah, the Shia militias in Iraq, which then can allow Russia to continue in Ukraine, their adventures. And then eventually that could allow, if the U.S. is so bottled up in the Middle East, that allows China to then eventually go into Taiwan. We've seen major excursions this week alone with China, with warships and their fighter pilots.
Yeah.
Last week, we saw North Korea show their biggest artillery barrage and biggest military might that they've done in the last 5 years. That happened last Thursday and Friday, reported by the South Korean newspapers. We know U.S. troops have been attacked by drones that have been provided by the Russians. So for energy, we both know this. Right now, energy is being priced by geopolitics. There's enough. I just saw that we're now over 13 million barrels a day in the United States.
Yes.
We know OPEC Plus has taken at least 1 million, maybe 2 million barrels off. If all of that supply came to market, if we opened up the Keystone pipeline, we don't let Venezuela, because we need that level of crude, because our refineries have to have that type of crude from Venezuela. We get it from our friends in Canada. We open up Keystone. We can lower oil prices much more significantly than we can. And quite honestly, we could probably unleash the Israelis to finally go take care of that problem. So for energy prices, what we're going to see, as long as we keep suppressing exploration and production, then we are going to continue to see oil prices the moment a hospital gets blown up, the moment a drone strike, or the moment that we're going to see an even deeper Chinese, military might that's going into Taiwan, then we're going to see this upward trajectory of oil prices, natural gas prices, and this is on top of, we know we're entering a possible severe winter. We've gone from a La Nina to an El Nino, and so I've traveled in Europe before in this time, and it gets very cold. And I just saw recently the Germans just reopened one of their dirtiest 500 megawatt coal-fired power plants. Yeah. If you want to pause and have a good chuckle, I mean, my God, David, you've been doing this a long time, and we both have done it a while. I haven't done as long as you, but we are seeing geopolitics take the price of oil and natural gas, and it's going to skyrocket. My hope is that the Iranians, which they've reported they don't want a wider war, that they're going to continue to hold back Hezbollah. But if Hezbollah is unleashed, if the United States military is unleashed, then we both know that oil prices, we're going to see, which is going to trigger inflation, which will then trigger higher interest rates. And we're in a really bad cycle at that point.
Do you see any real potential threat for disruptions of the free flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf?
Absolutely. I mean, we saw the Finnish Estonia pipeline recently be sabotaged. That's the Iranians have the capability to shut out the Strait of Hormuz. They have it.
Yeah.
They have the capability to unleash Hamas. They have the capability to unleash the Quds Force, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Hezbollah. We forget about the Shia militaries that when we left Iraq, though we're not really there, but we're there. They can go take out those U.S. forces. And we certainly know with the Russians in Syria, with Turkey, with what Erdogan just said last week, they called the Israeli war criminals. Now Biden says yesterday he wants a pause for humanitarian aid. I always look at these things, Dave, as like building blocks. It's one bad thing after another. And at some point, we've got a really bad hornet's nest right now of a lot of actors. And those actors have interests. They have their own interests that are rightly understood. And all it takes is one powder keg and whew, here we go. While we have the Europeans right there demanding massive amounts of energy and electricity because they're going into winter. So it's a powder keg. I think we live in very dangerous times. My greatest hope for all of this is that Biden will look at his reelection efforts and will have a strong military presence as a deterrence, and that the Iranians will ultimately say they do not want to provoke Israel so much that they would unleash their nuclear arsenal, which is the worst kept secret in the worst kept secret in foreign policy parlance or the world or the corridors of power in the UN, is that the Israelis have anywhere between 80 to 200. I've even read yesterday, they say that they could even possibly get another 400 online very quickly, which then if that happens, then you go, what did the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Vietnamese do? If China says we're going into Taiwan, we know immediately the Japanese will arm themselves, and likely the South Koreans would, and they'd ally themselves along with the Filipinos and the others with that block of Eastern nations to go nuclear. And then, oh, by the way, the world's most populous country is right there in the middle of it, India. It's a powder keg, and so I'm very hopeful for U.S. military deterrence in the region. I thought that was very wise to send those aircraft carriers, and then also that the Iranians are going to sit back and go, we do not want to unleash a nuclear Israel. These are so, I know that, yeah. Well, let's, okay. Well, David, that was a lovely thing we just talked about. Yeah.
Well, no, but it's all absolutely
I'm so
right.
sorry.
I mean,
yeah. I wish I had better news, but we live in dangerous times. We just do.
We do, and I just have so little. The most frightening aspect of it all to me is I just have so little faith in current leadership in the United States and Europe to deal with issues like this in a thoughtful, from a strategic standpoint, a thoughtful way, and rather than a political way. And as you mentioned earlier, with this advocacy for a pause, we're already seeing them go more to politics than strategic thinking. So it's a little scary.
Yeah, it is.
So on a less explosive subject, I did want to ask you about your reaction to, despite all the subsidies that we've invoked in the IRA and over in Europe, in the wind industry is really beginning to show signs of real financial distress due to just these changes in the economic situation they claim have been impacting them, which they have been. Does any of that surprise you? I mean, Siemens and Ørsted really looks like it's on a path to bankruptcy at this point with all the farm downs it's doing and demands for more subsidies. Can the government just keep throwing more and more subsidies at these industries to help prop them up, or will they eventually fail?
In the short term, they can. In the short term, since we're not really following true economics anymore, we're still saying that, hey, we can spend as much as we want and have no consequences. We saw it over in Germany with their, I think it's RW, one of their power companies. They got over a $10 billion infusion. They seem to be doing better now. I think you will look at massive government subsidies and interventions, whether it's the electrical vehicle business of GM and Ford, whether it's Ørsted, whether it's Siemens. There seems to be that electorates right now, David, are allowing their governments to just print money. So in the short term, yeah. And in the short term, there is almost a quantitative easing or economic infusion, especially in the United States. We have over $1 trillion now is going to interest. Okay, that's going. If you hold a bond, if I hold a mutual fund, I'm getting short-term infusions. Now, long-term, no, it won't happen. And also at the end of the day, physics is going to win. Engineering is going to win. And no matter how big I build that turbine, I always say, currently they are not technologically viable. They only work about 25% of the time. Whether the wind or the sun, whether the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, it works about 25% of the time. It's capacity factor. The fancy terms we use for electrical grids. I hate those terms. Does it work or does it not work? And so, no, I think you're going to continue. Interest rates are not coming down. These power purchasing agreements they've made, certainly on the East Coast of the U.S., they didn't factor in higher interest rates. They didn't factor in the supply chain difficulties.
Right.
I can also tell you from my own work currently that one of the biggest factors we're seeing to keep nuclear from growing is workforce development. And it's incredibly difficult to build an offshore wind turbine. It's incredibly difficult to maintain these things. You need workers who are trained, educated, and those are hard to come by, whether the nuclear power industry or certainly an offshore wind turbine with undersea cabling that takes in a lot of factors that engineers will tell you. When you get an engineer to talk off the record, they'll go, we're simply not there yet.
Yeah.
To say that we can have an undersea cable that's getting sloshed around by a volatile bodies of water, wind that's mixed with sand and salt and water, it's not going to make the turbine work very well. So no, David, I don't see it being economically viable. If you wanted to use it, I would say choose solar over wind, but even then I have problems with solar based upon the human rights abuses, but at least you have that polysilicon chain, and at least that's an economic generator that folks, okay, they can put it on their houses, they can use it in industrial farms and in the sunnier areas of the United States.
Yeah, and you talk about workforce, and I wonder how you reacted when you saw the recent IEA report talking about how, well, we're just going to need to build 50 million miles of new and refurbished transmission between now and 2040 to facilitate the expansion of the grid. It's like they don't even understand what that's going to take in terms of not just resources, but human resources that don't exist. I mean, there's literally zero chance that you're going to have the intellectual capability and the workforce capability to get that done, right? And is there anyone that's thinking about all these things at the global level, in your view?
Not that I've seen. I can certainly just say my own personal work and research back to nuclear. There's not enough people to build the amount of nuclear that's needed. Yeah. It's not even close. There's not enough specialized welders and people that pour concrete and people that do rebar, all of these things. When you look at an electrical grid, the best work I've read thus far on it is Robert Bryce. I've looked at some of his data. I've looked at the reports he's done. He breaks it down, just the linesmen alone, the specialty people to work on the lines. There's a specialty metal that's required. There's one company in the US that does it. We talked about in one of our books, I think it takes 29 different permits from different agencies to get a permit to build power lines, not in particular high voltage transmission power lines, which are going to be needed. Then go try to get the right of ways from people. Just those political issues. And, if you're a gentleman who had a farm and, okay, am I going to pay you? Am I going to go through eminent domain? There's not enough workers. There's not enough materials. It's simply not there. Yeah. So again, I think you really asked a great question a few minutes ago of going, why? It goes back to an ideology. I really love how you phrase that. It's an ideology. So my ideology says I'm not even going to look at the truth. I'm not going to listen to David Blackmon. I don't want to do that. What does David know? Well, he's been doing this 40 or 50 years. What does Ron Stein know? Well, he's been doing it 60 years. Maybe they know something. So no, I all the research I've done and I've looked at electrical grids. I've written a book about electrical grids. Nuclear had to do this for 2.5 years. The research, factual data, not my opinion, shows there is not enough workers to build out even close to the amount of the expansion of the grid that's needed. It's not even close.
Well, listen, I could go on for hours on this, really and truly, but we have to keep these things at half an hour, so we're running up against time. Before we go, let everyone know where they can find you and your books and your other work products, so they can follow what you're doing.
Well, look for my books on Amazon. It's the best way. The first one was called Energy Made Easy. The second one is Just Green Electricity. And the third one you talked about is Green Energy Exploitations. Currently, I'm not doing a ton of writing because within my job and So I need to keep things kind of, I really need to
Right.
stay really,
I've been in the
focused.
same boat. Yeah.
You can only, once I'm off the job, I can be able to, talk more and write more. If you Google my name, my writings are globally. The things I've done recently is for a publication out of Washington, D.C. called The National Interest. I've written numerous articles for them. It's my most
Yeah, I
recent
found
piece.
all those online.
Yeah, on nuclear power. I've also written for the Asia Times, geopoliticalmonitor.com. I've been picked up by Business Insider, USA Today, oilprice.com. So all of you can read all of that I've done, and then I'm open for any podcasts that others are available, and there's others that I've done that are out there. So my work right now, the last couple of years, really has focused on nuclear power, and moving forward, David, it's really changed my life, my energy life, and I plan on continuing being an advocate and writing about and continuing working in the nuclear space if possible.
Fantastic, man. This has been great. We need to get you back to just do a podcast on the nuclear thing as well. Would love to do that in December, January. So I'll be in touch. Okay.
I would love that, David.
All right, man. Thank you. And thanks to our producer, Eric Perel, for all your work, to the Sandstone Group for hosting our show, and to the U.S. Oil and Gas Association for being our sponsors. I'm David Blackmon, and that's all for now.